Usually when we talk about a diagnosis,
Mm.
um, whether it's medical or psychological, there is this comforting expectation of precision.
Right, like you expect a clear answer.
Exactly. It's like engineering. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the X-ray shows that jagged white line on the black background.
Yeah.
And the doctor just points to the screen and says, there it is.
Uh,
That's the problem.
It's binary. It's totally quantifiable. It's either broken or not broken.
Yes. It's clean.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, we love that as humans. We love things to be visible, to be neatly categorized and placed in a box with a clear label.
We really do.
But you can't point to an X-ray of existential guilt.
Yeah.
You can't look at an MRI and say, ah, look at this dark shadow in the lower quadrant. That's your profound sense of cultural displacement.
No, you definitely cannot.
When you step into the world of human emotion, of memory, of leaving your homeland, that diagnostic machinery just completely breaks down.
Right.
We're looking at a landscape that is, well, it's murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because the symptoms of cultural displacement or, profound melancholy, they aren't physical fractures.
Right. They're invisible.
Exactly. They are silences, they are unsaid words. It's the way you react to a lingering scent on the wind or the specific haunted way you look at a photograph of someone you used to know.
Which you can't measure with a machine.
You can't. And to diagnose those things, to really map that kind of invisible terrain, you don't need a medical machine, you need a poet.
And that is precisely why we are here today. In 2017, a Sri Lankan man sitting in the hyper-modern suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, managed to put that exact unquantifiable feeling on paper.
He really did.
Today's deep dive is taking you into a profoundly moving, incredibly dense literary space. We are exploring a poetry collection written in Sinhala, titled Beaming Petals in a Henna Vine, by Nirasha Gunasekera.
And to really understand what we're looking at today, we have to establish the context of where and how these words were born.
Let's do that, because context is everything here.
It really is. This is contemporary Sinhala poetry, but it is written entirely from the diaspora context. Gunasekera is writing from Melbourne.
Right.
So you immediately have this massive geographical and cultural tension baked into every single syllable. You have the ancient language, the natural imagery, and the soul of Sri Lanka operating within the suburban, optimized reality of Australia.
It's a total collision of worlds.
Yeah.
And the emotional landscape of this book, honestly, it is heavy.
Very heavy.
It's beautiful, but it is defined by this relentless, suffocating melancholy. There's this delicate tension of intimacy, the crushing weight of memory, and the jarring, everyday reality of displacement.
Yeah.
Reading this collection, to me, it feels like holding a beautifully carved but incredibly heavy stone.
I think that's the perfect analogy.
It's small enough to fit in the palm of your hand.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a relatively slim book of poems, right? But its emotional density grounds you completely. You can't just casually toss it aside on your nightstand and go about your day. It pulls you down into its gravity. You, as the reader, are forced to carry its weight.
And because of that intense density, we aren't going to do you the disservice of trying to skim the entire book today. That
Yeah.
would just be a superficial flyover.
No way.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to guide you through a tightly focused, microscopic curation of this collection.
A really close look.
We're putting a magnifying glass on the book's opening dedication and exactly 7 specific poems. Just 7.
We want to understand how this male poet navigates the brutal and beautiful realities of life, love, and exile.
And how he uses the absolute bare minimum of language to devastate the reader.
But we really have to start before the poetry even technically begins.
Oh, yes, the dedication.
Before you even get to the first stanza of the first poem, there is the dedication. And the dedication does an enormous amount of heavy lifting.
It really frames the ethical and emotional tone for everything that follows, doesn't it? It sets the rules of engagement.
It does.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately. The dedication reads, "To Chandima, the shadow that stayed hand in hand without letting go in life's rough terrains."
The shadow that stayed hand in hand. It's a profound image.
It really is, but it's also slightly paradoxical, isn't it? Usually when we think of a shadow in literature or poetry, it implies something dark.
Or something fleeting.
Right, or maybe something ominous trailing behind you that you can't escape. But here, he subverts that completely. The shadow is an anchor.
It's this constant faithful presence in the jarring terrain of his life and his migration experience.
Chandima is his wife, and he is portraying her as this ultimate grounding force.
But here's where the context absolutely shatters that simple romantic interpretation. What is fascinating here is the intense tension that bubbles up the moment you read the author's preface.
Which follows right after that beautiful dedication.
Exactly. The dedication frames her as this devoted anchor, but in the preface, Gunasekera refers to his own work, this very book, as a guilty flower.
A guilty flower. That phrase has been echoing in my head all week.
It's striking because he explicitly admits in the preface that he stole time from his wife, Chandima, and his 2 children to write these poems.
Wow.
He says he locked himself in a dark room of his heart to create this. He actively isolated himself from the very family that grounds him.
And here is the real kicker for you as the reader. He mentions that as of the book going to print, she hadn't read a single poem in it.
Not one.
He hadn't shared it with her. She didn't even know the title of the book until the physical copy was printed.
Which is absolutely wild.
It is. So what does this all actually mean? Because I have to push back a little here, or at least challenge the romance of it.
Sure.
Does this beautiful dedication actually just serve as an apology tour? Is the poet trying to balance the profound guilt of isolating himself for his art by immortalizing the very person he isolated himself from?
Like a preemptive strike of guilt.
Exactly. Like, hey, sorry I completely checked out of our marriage and parenting duties for months, but look, I dedicated the book to you.
It feels a little manipulative, doesn't it? It definitely flirts with that line, and that raises a really important question about the ethics of creation, especially for artists with families.
It really does.
But I would argue that Gunasekera isn't being manipulative because he doesn't shy away from that guilt. He centers it. He knows the paradox he's living.
How so?
He knows he is stealing the present moment with his family to write poems that are, in many ways, obsessively looking backward at isolation in the past. By dedicating it to Chandima and calling it a guilty flower, he's setting a tone for you, the reader.
Like a warning label.
Yes. He is saying, I am imperfect. I am confessing my flaws, my selfishness, and my emotional distance to you before the poetry even begins.
So it's less of an apology and more of a confession.
Yeah.
It immediately puts you in a space of acknowledged imperfection.
Exactly.
You aren't reading the work of a man who claims to be a perfect husband or a man who has his new life in Australia all figured out. You're reading the work of a man who feels immense longing and immense guilt about that longing.
Precisely. He is establishing an atmosphere of brutal honesty. And with that ethical and emotional framework established, we can actually step into the architecture of his memory.
Yes, let's dive into the actual poetry.
Let's look at how he constructs desire right out of the gate in the opening poem, Dust of Time Sprouts of Love.
Right away, in this very first poem, he gives us this highly unconventional description of a girl from his past. He doesn't describe some flawless, idealized muse.
Far from it.
He highlights a girl with slightly protruding front teeth. He explicitly describes her as having an unusual shape that is entirely devoid of geometric perfection.
It's such a striking subversion of traditional romantic poetry.
Right.
If you look at classical poetry, especially in South Asian contexts, it often relies heavily on geometric perfections. Faces like the full moon, perfectly aligned features, eyes like lotus petals, everything is symmetrical.
But Gunasekera shatters that instantly. He says, no, the object of my fascination, the ghost that haunts my memory, was not a standard beauty.
But she haunts him intensely. He said she looks out from the secret realm of his mind.
And what fascinated me is how he builds the climax of this poem. He's constructed this intense, almost explosive internal fantasy about her gaze.
It's a very vivid buildup.
He says when their eyes meet in his memory, it's like a huge explosion. And he describes himself walking around with a pan of fire on his head, just burning up in total silence. It's his agonizing, exquisite tension.
Then the illusion completely snaps.
Yes, the tension is broken. But how is it broken? What breaks it?
Well, he hears her voice.
Right. He writes that he hears her voice asking a very mundane question. Why are you listening to a song you haven't heard in a long time?
A totally ordinary question.
And the exact moment she speaks, the crystal of his dream just shatters into a million pieces. The fantasy is completely broken by reality.
This is where we can start applying a slightly deeper philosophical lens to what Gunasekera is doing, because he is perfectly illustrating a core psychoanalytic concept regarding how human beings process desire.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's get into the theory.
The critic Saman Wickramarachchi, in his analysis of this collection, points out how Gunasekera is constantly wrestling with the nature of lack and desire. When the poet is gazing at this girl in his memory, when he is burning up in silence, he's projecting his own internal fantasy onto her.
Right, because she isn't actually there doing anything.
Exactly. As long as she is silent, As long as she is just a static image with slightly protruding teeth, she can be whatever he needs her to be. She is an empty vessel for his desire.
Because she isn't real in that moment. She's an avatar in his head. She's essentially a character he is writing.
He is constructing a fantasy to deal with reality, but the moment she speaks, the moment she asks that mundane question, she asserts her own subjectivity.
She becomes a real person.
Right. She is no longer an object on a pedestal. She is a real, breathing person with her own thoughts and a real voice. And reality shatters the fantasy. The poet realizes that the intense desire he was chasing wasn't actually about her, it was about the distance between them.
Wait, slow down, explain that. He prefers the distance to the actual person.
Yes, and this is a concept heavily explored by the philosopher Slavoj Žižek. Žižek argues that human desire is a paradox.
How so?
We think we want to achieve the object of our desire, to get the girl, to get the dream job, to reach the destination. But often, the realization of the desire destroys it.
Because it's never as good as the daydream.
Partly, but it's more that what we actually enjoy is the state of desiring. We enjoy the distance. The fantasy is a safe space. The moment the girl speaks, the distance collapses, the fantasy is fulfilled, and the desire dies.
Oh, that's heavy. It's kind of tragic, too, so he can only safely love the past when it stays safely in the past. If the past speaks to him, it ruins the dream.
Which perfectly establishes the tragic mechanism of his memory for the rest of the book. He is addicted to looking backward, but he knows that looking backward is inherently a flawed, destructive process.
And speaking of that destructive process, that urge to break your own illusions leads us directly into another facet of his psychology. We see this exact same urge to disrupt his own peace, but this time with a physical object instead of a memory. Let's look at the poem titled After a Cruel Joy.
This is one of the most visually stunning poems in the entire collection.
It really is.
Yeah.
I want you, the listener, to picture this scene in your mind. You're deep in an ancient jungle in Sri Lanka. It's thick, it's green, and there is a giant silent bell hanging on a weathered stone pillar.
A very serene setting.
Very. The poet sets the scene with this absolute heavy silence that the jungle and the bell are holding together. It's deeply peaceful, it's ancient. And what does the narrator do?
He ruins it.
He runs up, grabs the rotten, decaying rope attached to the bell, and pulls it with all his might, specifically to shatter the silence. The birds scatter in terror, the echo bounces violently off the mountains, and he just stands there bathing in the reverberations.
And the title he gives to this act is A Cruel Joy.
Right. Cruel joy. I have to be honest, reading this, my first reaction was, isn't he just being kind of a jerk here?
It does seem that way at first glance.
I mean, he's walking into this perfectly harmonious, ancient, natural space and just throwing a tantrum to make noise. Why do we do this? Why is there this deeply human urge to walk into a perfectly peaceful space and just make a mess? To disrupt it, just to feel something.
I don't think it's just a tantrum. I think it's an existential rebellion. Silence, especially the profound, indifferent silence of ancient ruins or deep jungles, forces us to confront our own insignificance.
Like the jungle doesn't care about you.
Exactly. The jungle doesn't care if you were there or not. It will outlast you. That kind of silence represents a symbolic death. By ringing the bell, by creating this violent, booming echo, the poet is asserting his existence against the void.
He is screaming, I am here, I matter, I can make the world shake.
Yes, but notice the guilt attached to it. He scatters the birds who are peacefully nesting. He destroys the harmony to prove he is alive.
It's that tension again. He needs to create the noise to prove he exists, but he feels deeply guilty for the collateral damage his noise causes.
That's the crux of it.
But is the bell just a literal bell, though? Given the context we established earlier of him hiding away from his family to write this book, I couldn't help but wonder if that silent, rusting bell is a metaphor for his own suppressed artistic voice.
That's a brilliant connection to make. Think about the details. The rope is rotten, the bell is rusty, it hasn't been used in a long, long time.
It's been neglected.
His poetic voice, suppressed by the sheer survival demands of migration, of fatherhood, of suburban life in Australia, has been rusting. It's been hanging silent in the jungle of his mind.
Wow.
When he finally grabs the rope, when he finally writes these poems, it's explosive. It echoes everywhere inside him, but it scatters his domestic peace. The birds flee. The family dynamic is disrupted by the booming echo of his art.
Okay, so we have this image of him disrupting his internal jungle. What happens when we look at the external world he actually lives in now?
It's a very different landscape.
If we're talking about domestic peace and suburban life, we have to look at the poem 36, 24, 36 Mothers. This is a massive, jarring pivot in the collection. We go from ancient jungles and giant rusting bells to the absolute hyperreality of the modern diaspora.
It's a very specific, very loaded title, 36, 24, 36, being, of course, the classic mathematically idealized measurements for a woman's figure.
Extremely loaded. He places us right at the school gate in the Melbourne suburbs. He is standing there observing the other mothers waiting to pick up their kids, and the imagery he uses is razor sharp. It's almost surgical.
It's incredibly observant.
He describes these women with peach-like kids. They're wearing the latest Fitbits on their wrists. They're chatting about organic fruits, personal trainers who help them maintain that V-shaped body, multivitamins, and debating the actors in last night's reality TV shows.
It's a portrait of intense, almost aggressive consumerism and superficiality. Everything is measurable.
Yes. Think about the metrics of that lifestyle. The Fitbit tracks the steps. The measurements track the body. The organic food tracks the health.
It's all highly optimized.
It's like the ultimate suburban performance, where everyone is relentlessly optimizing their lives. But then the poet drops the camera, so to speak, onto another figure standing slightly apart from the Fitbit moms.
A completely different figure.
It's a mother with a wrinkled, sagging belly, the actual unoptimized physical toll of giving birth and raising children. She's sorting through a messy pile of books in her tired child's bag.
And what is she asking her friend about? Not personal trainers or multivitamins.
Right, she's asking about tuition classes, the progress of a house construction back home, and the head monk at the local temple.
Now, you were talking earlier about how he acts as an observer. How does he position himself in this specific scene?
That's what hit me so hard. It's the sheer alienation. You can feel how incredibly out of place the poet feels. He is watching this display of optimized Western suburban wealth, the Fitbits and the organic juice, and he sees right through it. It means nothing to him.
But he also sees this other mother who clearly represents the struggling immigrant reality.
Exactly. She's worried about education, shelter, and spiritual survival through the temple. She isn't optimized. She is exhausted. And yet, he doesn't fully align with her either.
He is physically present at the school gate, but psychologically he is entirely absent. By positioning himself as the silent observer of both archetypes, the optimized Western mother and the exhausted immigrant mother, the poet highlights his own utter displacement.
He's stuck in the middle.
He doesn't belong to the Fitbit culture, but he also feels a profound distance from the immigrant mother trying to cling to the temple and the tuition classes. He is literally a ghost at the school gate.
A ghost at the school gate. He is just watching life happen from behind a pane of glass.
And this right here is a crucial defining element of diaspora literature. Too often, people think diaspora writing is just about missing your homeland. It's not.
It's more complicated than that.
It's about the profound, relentless daily alienation of navigating your new home. You are surrounded by a culture that measures success in steps counted on a wristband and organic diets, while you are internally carrying the heavy, unquantifiable baggage of exile.
You are speaking a different emotional language than everyone around you.
Exactly.
And the terrifying thing is that you never know when that unquantifiable baggage is going to be triggered. You could be living your optimized suburban life, and suddenly the past just ambushes you. Which brings us to the poem, An Old Flower Fragrance.
This poem operates on such an intense sensory level.
It operates entirely on the mechanics of olfactory memory. Smell is the sense most directly biologically tied to the memory and emotion centers in the human brain.
It just bypasses all logic and hits you right in the gut.
Exactly. So in the poem, he is walking home from work, presumably in the dead of a freezing Australian winter, and his wife casually asks him a simple question. Is that jasmine vine still blooming?
Such an innocent question.
And he realizes he had completely forgotten about the plant. But the question forces him to go look. He goes out into the freezing cold, finds this jasmine vine, and the scent hits him.
And I want you to look closely at how he describes the reaction to that scent. What happens to him?
It doesn't make him happy. That's the truly tragic part of this poem. You would think smelling a flower for your homeland would bring a moment of joy or sweet nostalgia.
But it doesn't.
Instead, he finds this white petal freezing in the winter cold, and he breathes in the scent, and he says he is sinking into the dark, muddy water of the familiar fragrance. He plucks a bit of the whiteness just to merge with the darkness. It's incredibly bleak.
Let's unpack the metaphor of the jasmine here, because Gunasekera is delivering a masterclass in symbolic layering. Jasmine is deeply, inextricably tied to South Asian culture.
It is.
It is used in spiritual offerings at the temple. It is worn in the hair at weddings. It thrives in warmth. It signifies home. Here, the jasmine vine has been physically transplanted to Australia. It is desperately trying to bloom in a freezing, hostile winter.
Oh, man. I didn't even put that together at first. The jasmine is him.
The jasmine is entirely him. It is the physical embodiment of the diaspora experience,
Yeah,
a tropical entity trying to survive in a cold, foreign climate where it does not naturally belong.
that's brilliant.
But what's fascinating is, as you noted, how he reacts to the scent. It brings a profound, dark melancholy. And here, I think we have to bring in Sigmund Freud's essay, Mourning and Melancholia, because it perfectly describes what Gunasekera is going through.
Okay, I've heard those terms used interchangeably. Break down the difference for me. How is melancholia different from just regular mourning?
It's a vital distinction. Freud argued that in regular mourning, you know exactly what you have lost. A person dies, a relationship ends, you lose a job.
Right, it's a specific, concrete loss.
The grief is conscious, it is tied to a specific object, and eventually the grieving process has an endpoint. You move on. In melancholia, however, the loss is unconscious or abstract. You know that you have lost something, but you don't fully know what it is.
Like a phantom pain.
And more dangerously, Freud argued that in melancholia, you are actually grieving a part of your own ego that was attached to the lost object.
So by smelling the jasmine, he isn't just missing the physical island of Sri Lanka. He is mourning the version of himself that existed in Sri Lanka.
Exactly.
A version of his own identity that is dead and gone, even though his physical body is still alive and walking around in Melbourne.
Exactly. The scent pulls him into a state of melancholia because it reminds him of an emotional wholeness, a version of his own soul that he can never regain in this new, cold landscape.
That's devastating.
The past becomes a dark, muddy water that he drowns in, rather than a comforting memory. He cannot mourn the loss of his past self properly because he is still alive. There is no grave to visit, so the melancholy just stretches on endlessly.
That is so profoundly bleak, but it is so universally real for anyone who has ever had to completely reinvent their life. But as dark as that is, it is nothing compared to the darkness of mourning someone who is sitting right in front of you.
No, it's a totally different kind of pain.
That takes us to Poem 19, which is without a doubt the darkest, most harrowing piece in the selection we're covering. It's titled, To a Woman in Depression.
It is a truly harrowing piece of writing. The observational precision he uses here is almost physically painful to read.
It is. Listeners, think about a time you've walked into a room where the air just feels thick with someone else's pain. He paints this deeply claustrophobic room. He notes that there are cobwebs hanging from the doorframe.
Just the cobwebs alone set this tone of neglect.
He has to ring the bell twice before she slowly opens it. And the details, her face is frightened. There are pill bottles scattered everywhere on the tables. The room is filled with stale cigarette smoke that literally chokes the chest. Her hands are visibly trembling.
It's so visceral.
But the detail that absolutely broke my heart is when he looks around this chaotic, decaying room, and he sees all these little trinkets and cheap ornaments on the shelves. And he notes that she obsessively protects them, like a little girl guarding her toys.
It's the contrast. He is highlighting the severe contrast between the physical decay of an adult woman's life and her psychological regression to a childlike state, seeking basic comfort in inanimate, controllable objects.
Yes. And then the camera pans again. He looks at a photograph hanging on the wall of her younger self, the vibrant, healthy, smiling woman she used to be.
Yeah.
And he looks back at the trembling, smoking, terrified woman sitting in front of him. And he asks this devastating internal question, is this really you?
It connects right back to what we were just discussing about Freudian melancholia, but projected outward. How do you mourn someone who is sitting right in front of you?
You can't really.
The clinical depression has essentially overwritten her original identity. The woman in the photograph is dead, but her body is still sitting in the room. The poet is acting as a helpless witness to an ongoing erasure. And notice his reaction at the very end of the poem. What does he do to help her?
He doesn't do anything. That's the tragedy. He hears the sound of a train fading away in the distance, and he just drops his gaze. He looks away.
He's paralyzed.
He realizes he can't fix it. He can't reach her through the smoke and the pills. He's just enveloped by the darkness of her reality and his own impotence. And what strikes me about his craft here is how he grounds this massive, medical, abstract concept of clinical depression into hyper-specific physical realities.
He's incredibly skilled at that.
He grounds it in a pill bottle, a cobweb, a trembling hand holding a cigarette. He doesn't lecture us about mental health or brain chemistry. He just forces us to sit in the suffocating smoke of that room until we feel it in our own chests.
That is the absolute hallmark of Gunasekera's craft throughout this collection. He never ever lets the abstract stay abstract. He forces it into the tangible physical world, and he uses the physical world to suddenly, violently snap the reader back to reality when they try to escape.
Which is the perfect description of the mechanic he uses in Poem 21, titled The Dream Broken. If Poem 19 was suffocating, Poem 21 is a masterpiece of emotional whiplash. The transition from his internal escape to his external reality is violent.
Walk us through the setup of this one, because it starts in a very different place.
Okay, so the poem starts as this incredibly vivid, sensual, almost cinematic fantasy. The poet is sitting alone at his desk writing. He smells coffee in the air.
Setting a very cozy mood.
And suddenly he feels these cold, snake-like fingers gently touching his neck, caressing him from behind. He imagines pulling this phantom woman close to him, unbuttoning her shirt. It's deeply intimate, it's romantic, it's highly charged.
It is a classic romantic poetic reverie. The poet alone with his muse.
Right. You, the reader, are floating in this romantic dreamscape with him. The language is flowing and beautiful. And then, bam! The brutal, instantaneous snap to reality. He wakes up.
The illusion shatters.
He's not at a romantic writing desk with a phantom lover. He is in a cramped little room. He's surrounded by his 2 kids. And he looks over in the dim lamplight, and what does he see? He sees his exhausted wife sleeping. And he specifically focuses the poem entirely on her cracked, swollen heels.
From snake-like sensual fingers unbuttoning a shirt to cracked, swollen heels in the space of a single stanza break.
It gave me literal goosebumps. The contrast is just, it's violent. It hits you like a bucket of ice water.
It is violent, and it's meant to be. This poem encapsulates the central tension of the entire collection, the unbearable guilt of the artist father.
He wants to escape, right?
He attempts to escape his cramped, exhausting, suburban, domestic reality by retreating into the pure, unburdened fantasy of his poetry. He conjures up phantom women, sensual encounters, a life of romantic abstraction where he is just a writer.
But reality is always waiting for him.
But the physical reality of his wife's labor, her cracked heels, swollen from working, from mothering, from surviving the rough terrain of the diaspora, is always there, anchoring him to the ground.
It's that dedication again, the dedication we talked about at the very beginning. Chandima is the shadow keeping him grounded in life's rough terrains.
Exactly.
Her cracked heels are the literal physical manifestation of walking that rough terrain. And he feels so intensely guilty for dreaming of other women, of other lives, of pure art, while she's literally bearing the physical weight of their shared reality.
This is where we can see a concept from Jacques Lacan operating perfectly. The poet enters the fantasy to escape reality, but the fantasy is inherently fragile.
Because he can't ignore the truth.
Right. It shatters because the poet's conscience won't let him ignore the material truth of his existence. The cracked heel is the intrusion of what Lacan calls the real with a capital R.
Hold on, time out. The real with a capital R. That sounds like a sci-fi concept or Matrix reference. Break that down for me simply. Are we just saying the cracked heel is a reality check, or is there a deeper psychological mechanism happening here?
It's deeper than just a reality check. In Lacanian theory, we construct reality using symbols, language, and fantasies to make life bearable. That's our subjective reality.
Okay, that makes sense.
But underneath that is the real with a capital R. The real is the raw, traumatic, unsymbolizable truth of existence that we constantly try to cover up. It is that which resists romanticization.
So you can't put a pretty spin on it.
You cannot poeticize a cracked, swollen heel. It is just a cracked heel. It is a symbol of pain, of exhaustion, of the slow decay of the body. When the poet sees the cracked heel, the capital R real violently punctures his romantic, poetic fantasy. The fantasy bleeds out, and he is left staring at the raw trauma of his wife's labor.
I love that explanation. It makes the poem so much more devastating. It's like he's intentionally punishing himself.
Yes.
He builds this beautiful, soaring dream and then slaps himself in the face with the undeniable evidence of his wife's exhaustion. It's as if he's telling himself, how dare you dream when she is suffering to keep your life together?
Exactly. It is the self-flagellation of the guilty creator. He cannot enjoy the dream because the cost of the dream is her cracked heels.
And that profound sense of isolation, of being utterly alone with these agonizing thoughts, even while surrounded by your sleeping family, leads us beautifully into the final poem in our selection, Poem 23, titled Remnants. If Poem 21 was about what wakes you up from the dream, Poem 23 is about what is left when the dream is gone. This poem is entirely about the devastating power of mundane objects left behind.
It is quite literally an inventory of absence.
That is a perfect way to put it, an inventory of absence. He doesn't write about the person who left. He just lists these ordinary things that someone has left behind in a room.
Just scattered things.
A folded tissue with a faint hint of perfume. A yellow hair tie forgotten on a bedpost. A single curled hair stuck to a bar of soap. An empty shampoo bottle thrown in the trash.
I want you to look at how he builds the emotional architecture here. Notice what he doesn't do.
What doesn't he do?
He doesn't say, I miss you. He doesn't say, my heart is broken. He doesn't say, the house feels empty. He forces the reader to look closely at the microscopic debris of human presence.
But why do those specific things hit so hard? Like, think about your own home. You drop a hair tie. You throw away a shampoo bottle. You don't notice a random hair on a bar of soap. Why does it suddenly feel like a tragedy in this poem?
Because in the context of isolation, those objects become the ultimate proof of intimacy. You don't leave your hair on a bar of soup in a stranger's house, or at least you don't notice it in the same way. You don't leave a scented tissue on a desk in a public place. These are the objects that track our most private, uncurated, intimate moments with another person. When the person is suddenly gone, these mundane objects become monumental.
They hold so much weight.
They tower over the poet. The empty shampoo bottle isn't just a piece of plastic. Look at how he describes it. He says it is a dead body in the trash can.
Oh, that line. A dead body in the trash can. It's so visceral. It transforms a piece of recycling into a corpse.
It shows how melancholia distorts our perception of the physical world. When you are profoundly isolated, the objects around you absorb your grief. The yellow hair tie becomes a blinding beacon of loss.
You know, reading this poem, it reminded me of how a minimalist painting works. Have you ever looked at a modern art piece where 95% of the canvas is just empty, stark white space, and there's just one tiny black square painted in the bottom corner?
Oh, you're talking about the use of negative space.
Yes. The artist isn't really painting the black square. They are painting the crushing emptiness around the square. The massive emptiness forces your eye to the tiny subject, and the tiny subject makes the emptiness feel vast and overwhelming.
That's a great way to look at it.
That's exactly what Gunasekera is doing with silence and fragmentation in these poems. He uses incredibly sparse language. He doesn't overwrite his emotions. He gives you the yellow hair tie, the tiny black square, and lets the massive crushing silence of the empty room surround it.
And you feel the silence.
It's the negative space of the unsaid that does all the heavy emotional lifting. He makes you feel the silence.
That's a beautiful and highly accurate analogy, and it speaks directly to his larger craft. Gunasekera's absolute economy of language is his greatest weapon as a writer.
He doesn't waste a single word.
He doesn't need 10 flowery adjectives to describe the nuances of sadness. He just needs to show you the cracked heel in the lamplight.
Or the Fitbit next to the wrinkled belly.
Precisely. He creates these intensely geometric structures. The poems themselves are very tightly controlled, very precise in their imagery, but the emotions bleeding through the cracks of that structure are raw, wild, and instinctive.
Now, I want to pivot and talk a little bit more about that psychoanalytic layer, because I know you've been deeply reading Salman Wickramarasky's critical introduction to the book, and he brings up this fascinating concept from Lacan, the idea of language as a torture chamber. Now, language is a torture chamber. That sounds extreme. What does that actually mean mechanically for a poet?
It's a concept that goes by the term the language torture chamber. Wickramarasky argues, using Lacanian theory, that for a poet, entering into language to express deep emotion is like walking willingly into a trap.
A trap? How so?
Think about it. You have these profound, chaotic, formless, deeply personal feelings, desire, guilt, the unique alienation of leaving Sri Lanka for Australia. They exist inside you as pure feeling. But to express them, to write a poem, you have to force them into words.
You have to translate it.
You have to enter what Lacan calls the symbolic order, and words are always inherently inadequate.
Because the moment you try to name a complex feeling, you kind of reduce it. You flatten it out to fit it into a dictionary definition.
Exactly. Language is a structural system inherited from society. It belongs to the collective, to what Lacan calls the big other. It isn't yours.
Okay, following you.
So when the poet tries to articulate his most private, unspeakable, highly individualized pain, he is forced to use the standardized tools given to him by the very society he feels alienated from. He enters the torture chamber of language, desperately twisting and bending syntax, grammar, and metaphor, trying to make these rigid words hold the immense fluid weight of his melancholia.
And it never works perfectly.
But the words always fall slightly short. They never perfectly capture the internal feeling, leaving the poet in a state of constant agony and unfulfillment.
I see. So the torture isn't that language is painful. The torture is that language is inadequate. It's the frustration of having a scream trapped in your chest, but only being able to whisper.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
But let me ask you this. Does thinking about it that way, through this dense academic Lacanian philosophical lens, make the poems feel colder to you? Because for me, these poems are so gut-wrenchingly human. They are about cracked heels and yellow hair ties. I sometimes worry that applying high theory to it strips away the raw, bleeding emotion.
That's a fair concern, but I think it actually explains why the gut punches hit so hard. The theory doesn't make it colder, it reveals the mechanics of the trap the poet is caught in.
Okay, tell me more.
We all feel that frustration of not being able to say exactly what we mean. Have you ever tried to explain to someone why you are sad and the words just sound stupid when you say them out loud?
Absolutely. All the time.
That's the torture chamber. When Gunasekera shows us the empty shampoo bottle, he is essentially saying, I cannot explain the depth of my loneliness to you. The words don't exist, so I will just show you this piece of plastic in the trash and hope to God you feel the echo of my pain. The theory gives us a vocabulary to understand his brilliant, desperate struggle with silence.
That makes a ton of sense. It completely explains why he relies so heavily on external observation rather than internal monologue. The poet in this collection is constantly watching things outside of himself. He's the ultimate observer self.
Always.
He watches the mothers at the school gate. He watches the jasmine vine freeze in the snow. He watches his wife sleep under the lamplight. He watches the depressed woman smoke her cigarettes. It's like he's a ghost, haunting his own life, unable to fully participate in it.
And that observer status, that ghostly presence, is the defining characteristic of his specific diaspora identity. He is physically present in Melbourne, he works there, his kids go to school there.
But mentally, he's somewhere else.
Psychologically, he is floating somewhere in the Pacific Ocean between Sri Lanka and Australia. He is a full participant in neither world. He is just watching the collision of these two realities, the traditional natural imagery of jungles and jasmine violently clashing with the hyper-modern reality of gyms, organic diets, and winter coats.
So considering all of this, the raw talent, the intense themes of guilt and memory, the incredible use of visual contrast, the agonizing inadequacy of language, how do we ultimately evaluate Gunasekera's authorial voice? Where does he fit?
I think his voice is highly original, primarily because he completely and utterly refuses to romanticize the diaspora experience.
Right, it's not a fairy tale.
So much diaspora literature focuses on a nostalgic, golden-hued longing for the motherland, where everything back home was perfect, or it focuses on a triumphant narrative of assimilation, where the immigrant overcomes all odds to succeed in the West.
The classic success story.
Gunasekera rejects both of those neat, marketable narratives. He offers a brutally honest, often deeply uncomfortable look at the psychological toll of displacement. He admits his profound selfishness as an artist. He admits his emotional distance from his own family. That level of vulnerability, to put your own flaws on display like that, requires immense artistic confidence.
I would completely agree. The geometric structures of the poems are tightly controlled, but the emotional honesty is almost dangerous. It feels risky to read, let alone to publish. Which brings me to the constructive critique portion of our dive. Is there a downside to this relentless honesty?
There can be, yeah.
Because reading these poems back to back, and we only read 7 today, imagine the whole book, the density of the melancholia is overwhelming. It is heavy, it is dark, and occasionally it feels like the poet is so deeply trapped in his own internal echo chamber that he forgets the reader is even there. He is just spinning in his own guilt.
That is a very valid structural critique of the collection. The book absolutely risks a certain claustrophobia. The drumbeat of guilt, sadness, isolation, and alienation is so constant, so unyielding, that a reader might feel emotionally suffocated by the midpoint. There are very few moments of levity. There is no release valve.
Right. I actually wrote down a question in my notes while I was preparing for this. Does the constant drumbeat of guilt and sadness risk numbing the reader? Because if every single poem is a gut punch, eventually your emotional stomach just goes numb. You stop feeling the impact.
That's a fair point.
So my question to you and to the listener is that a flaw in the writing, or is that overwhelming, suffocating weight exactly what he intends for you to feel? Is he intentionally trying to trap us in the torture chamber with him so we know what his life feels like?
I lean heavily toward the latter. I don't think he is trying to make it an easy or pleasant read. Remember your analogy of the heavy carved stone?
You're supposed to feel the weight.
He wants you to feel the weight of that stone in your hands. If he gave you a break, if he offered a neat, happy resolution or a funny anecdote, it would betray the reality of his melancholia. Melancholia doesn't take days off. The inaccessibility, the claustrophobia, the relentless rumination that is the diaspora experience for him, he is demanding that the reader sit in the dark room with him. He refuses to turn on the light just to make you comfortable.
Well, he certainly succeeds at making you feel it. Taking this journey through these 7 poems today, from the shattered illusions of the girl with the unusual smile, to the violent ringing of the bell in the ancient jungle, the optimized mothers at the school gates, the freezing jasmine triggering his past, the depressed woman's chaotic room, the shocking realization of the cracked heels in the lamplight, and finally the vast emptiness of the shampoo bottle in the trash. It has been a profoundly exhausting but brilliant emotional and intellectual journey.
It absolutely has. By isolating these specific moments, Nirasha Gunasekera establishes himself not just as a skilled Sinhala poet, but as a vital, absolutely necessary voice in modern diaspora literature. He maps the terrain of exile not through maps or geography, but through the microscopic, painful, unsymbolizable details of daily life.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring us all the way back to where we started. I want to close the loop. Let's go back to that dedication. Back to Chandima, the shadow who stayed hand in hand.
The anger in the rough terrain.
Right. We established at the very beginning that he wrote this entire collection, this dark, heavy, relentlessly honest confession of his internal life, his selfish desires, his guilt, and his profound sense of isolation while physically isolating himself from her.
He hid it from her.
He dedicated it to her, calling it a guilty flower. But he actively hid it from her until the ink was dry and it was printed.
A secret locked in the dark room of his heart, as he phrased it.
So here's my final lingering thought for you, the listener, to mull over today. Think about the mechanics of that moment. What happens in that terrifying, quiet moment when the book is finally printed, and he walks into the room and hands a physical copy to his wife?
That's a heavy moment to imagine.
What happens to the art, and more importantly, what happens to the artist in that precise moment when the muse finally reads the confession? When she flips the pages and reads about the phantom woman he dreams of, the crushing loneliness he feels while sitting next to her, and the poetic immortalization of her own cracked, swollen heels. Think about that the next time you hide your true feelings to protect someone you love. Because eventually the heavy carved stone of the truth has to be handed over.
And you can only hope they're strong enough to hold it.